even just watching you do the intro, standing in front of the cross, I'm nervous. I am going to have to get PG as all get out here because I usually got a little colorful language, but this is going to remind me the whole time. And you do have to take a picture so I can send it to my father, who's a Presbyterian preacher. He's not going to believe this. All right, so give me like 5 minutes to attempt to straddle that line between sounding like an arrogant prick and giving you enough information about who I am that you feel like I'm valuable enough to listen to. So let's see if I can do it this time. The biggest criteria that I have that I think gives me some ability to speak is that I'm a father raising 3 kids in the weed capital of the world right now, in Boulder, Colorado. And those of you from California, especially if it's Northern California, I'm sorry we have taken the title over. Amsterdam's got nothing on Colorado anymore. So I've got a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And the first thing that I would like to ask you to do here is to consider what this whole thing has been like from their perspective. And even put yourself into the perspective of young kids from Iowa who have grown up with a very different reality on social media, a different reality inside of the music that they listen to and the programs that they watch, one in which the regular consumption of THC has absolutely been normalized. So somebody who grew up in the mid-90s, I'm from Washington, D.C., it was still something bad, still something that we weren't allowed to do. Still something that would get us in the back of one of your cars. It's changed today. So Colorado voted in 2012 and we opened retail in 2014. So this means that my 17-year-old was 11 when we opened retail stores. She remembers life before retail, but not too much because we had medical before that. She remembers life before cartoon characters advertising, before planes flying over every single home sporting event we have, giving you the specials on 8s that week. But not really. You skip down to my 11-year-old who really has no memory of a world that doesn't involve commercialized THC. When he was 4, we were walking downtown Boulder. If any of you guys have been there, we were on Pearl Street, and we were walking to a doctor's appointment, and he's on my shoulders. And a dude comes up with a balloon from the dispensary to give to him. He has always been a target market back home. Always. So I think for a lot of us, what we do is we kind of come into this conversation and we want to bring where we came from. I want to bring in from the 90s. And I remember when The Chronic came out and seeing that album cover, we were all like, oh, look at the courage that Dre has putting a leaf on the front of that. And then Cypress Hill put an album out called Legalize It. And I had the shirt that said Legalize It. And that was like, boy, was that some counterculture stuff. We were pushing the envelope there. It's just been normalized now. Like the Green Cross is synonymous with a lot of things. Like it's almost played out. It's so normalized. The other little bit of experience I got is I'm in recovery. I got sober June 15th of 1996, and back in Washington. And by the grace of God, I haven't found it necessary to put any mood-altering substances in my body since then. So I do a lot of work with guys in early recovery inside of the 12-step community. I sponsor guys, also work inside of that world, and having another commercialized substance has been a game changer for us. So here's something I just want you guys to think about for the people who are in recovery. If we were all sitting here together and this weren't in a church and it was a out to dinner sort of a thing, and you were having a glass of wine with your dinner, I wouldn't smell that wine. And for somebody in recovery, I think you guys know the best trigger that we have for memory is smell. You know, it's like you wake up on a fall morning and you remember that first hunt with your dad. You wake up in the spring and you remember fishing last year. Like I don't smell it when it's around. But with people constantly growing, drying, and burning marijuana in Colorado, I smell it. I have a buddy I got sober with out east who came in last week, and as we were driving to my house, we passed a field that had just been harvested. And he was like, I'm not smelling weed, am I? It's like, what else do you think you're smelling? You smell it for there's 3 miles. You can smell it. So for those of us in recovery, there's a bit of an added challenge to the whole thing. There just is. And before I go any farther on the in recovery thing, I would not be alive. I would not have made it through my use if it weren't for intervention from law enforcement. Y'all are catching a lot of heat right now for what you do, and I want to tell you, as somebody who's on the other side of it, thank you. Because you only see us if we offend again. You don't see what happens when we make it through the other side. And I made it through the other side as a direct result of interventions from people who wear bulletproof vests when they go to work, which I do not. So thank you guys for what you do very much. In 2007, my climbing partner and I started a little nonprofit that became a very large nonprofit called Phoenix Multisport, now called the Phoenix. That's how I got involved in the substance abuse world. And then I left it in 2012 to join the University of Colorado Hospital. UCH, that campus, the main campus, was a safety net hospital for the Denver area, so we treated a lot of impoverished Denver, and we had a behavioral health service line throughout that also included adult alcohol and chemical dependency treatment. Our emphasis being on extremely acute mental health mixed with substance abuse. We liked, it's called co-occurring disorder. We liked the people who had really, really loud depression, bipolar, anxiety, and were using substances to balance that out. One of the things that fell under me there was the admissions to that. And so you see, I joined in 2012, which was when we voted. And then in 2014, we opened recreational sales. We opened the storefront. And what I saw in those first 3 years, at the end of the first year of having recreational sales, so we didn't take anybody who was mandated. You had to want to come, and only adults. At the end of the first year, at the end of 2014, we were treating more adults for cannabis use disorder than we were for opiate use disorder. And nobody had seen it coming. There weren't pharmacologic interventions. There weren't therapeutic interventions. Everybody was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. So I got this front row seat at the University of Colorado Hospital watching people come in. And that's ultimately what led to me writing a book called Weed Inc., which I'll give you some stuff for, which ultimately Simon & Schuster's picked up, and it should be in our Barnes & Nobles and Amazon and all that sort of stuff. And then last year, I actually got a chance to contribute to, if any of you, any medical professionals, Springer, who writes all of the textbooks for physician education. They're the only ones who do it. They actually published a book called Cannabis and Medicine, which was a comprehensive discussion of every subspecialty of medicine and cannabis's interaction with it. And I actually got to co-author the section on recovery, which was amazing, especially because it's like every single contributing author is MD with 1 PhD, and then below that is just like Ben Cort, because I barely made it out of high school. Like, really? And in 2017, I gave a TED Talk that when given the opportunity to give 15 minutes on the subject, what I decided to go with were the ridiculous discrepancies in what we were promised from a social justice standpoint to what we got inside of Colorado, and how the commercialization of this substance negatively impacted and continues to impact the most disenfranchised communities inside of Colorado, our African American, our Hispanic, and our LGBTQ. And then I spent 3 years consulting in treatment, a lot in professional athletics. I still work for the NFL, for the NFL Players Association, for a lot of the different teams when we're not COVID, and all the D1 colleges I do work with. I've done a lot of work with states, trying to help them build infrastructure that would keep the big problems at bay, help New Zealand come up with their infrastructure, Canada as well. And now I run a little treatment program in the mountains called the Foundry. It's a small 18-bed facility for men who've experienced significant trauma and are working to get sober. Our favorite people in the world are hard men, guys coming off of ranches and guys coming out of law enforcement, and the guys who don't want to get help is who we love to help the most. And then there's some other boards and stuff, but forget that, that's too long. Okay, now let's actually talk. Before I begin with everything, you've got to get this one thing, that there's nothing subjective about real science. And real science is what we will be discussing today. I will not share with you opinion polls. If you ask me a question and I have to answer with opinion, I will tell you it is opinion, because there's way too much fake news, if you will, on this issue. Where people saying, well, the jury's still out. I read this the other day. Somebody said, well, actually, we don't really know if in utero exposure to THC is bad for a fetus. I was like, whoa, actually, no, we absolutely do know. Like, we can say with a surety that it is bad for, but there's so much spin in this world. And the reason why there's so much spin is because there's so much money to be made. So everything I share with you will be journal published and peer reviewed. I don't care what 62% of the country said about something. And I don't really care about that opinion piece your nephew read on Huffington Post. What matters is something that is journal published and peer reviewed. Journal published, peer reviewed. Everything else can walk. Be careful of the spin. Screw the surveys. All right, I got to cover this one a little bit. No. It's like really, really simple. And it's not just because of the combusting and inhaling. We're not just worried about smoking a thing for something that's lung stuff. It's way more complicated than that. And this would be a 2-hour presentation. I can give you the name of somebody who does it way better than I do, who can talk about the physiology with it. But any THC inside of your system mixed with COVID-19 virus inside of your system, don't. There you go. All right, done. Now, I'm going to make a crazy statement that I hope is a little inflammatory, and I actually kind of hope frustrates one or two of you a little bit. And then I just ask for 10 minutes to justify it. And if I have not justified that statement, please, by all means, grab a plate of barbecue and head out, because I don't want to waste your time. What I need to get through to you in the next couple of minutes is that this is a new school cannabis, and it's not what you smoked in the 70s. And the problem is that for so many of us who are attempting to regulate, attempting to try to understand, and attempting to treat people with it, we're thinking back to weed. Now, the problem that I have with this is that all y'all know about weed. The vast majority of the country hasn't consumed. About 65% of this country's never consumed THC. I'd imagine that number's a bit higher in Vinton, Iowa. However, a lot of y'all have consumed, but every one of you knows a guy. You all got an uncle who had a crazy time in the 80s. You got a brother who hit it pretty hard with me in the 90s. You all know someone personally who has consumed. And so the challenge here is I've got to try to show you the difference between what they were consuming and what people are consuming today. But our tendency is to go back into this thing to say, we already know this. I know the answer to this. I was at my very first meeting ever. I sat on the pain committee for the NFL Players Association for a while. My very first meeting ever, they asked me to come in and give a presentation to the entire executive body about cannabis as they were doing the new collective bargaining agreement. And one of the attorneys walked in, a huge man, former player. They're all former players who work there. I mean, like, he towers above me. And he says to the guy who runs, he says, D, what are we doing here? And he said, Mr. Cort's going to teach you about cannabis. And the dude laughed and he goes, son, there's not a damn thing you can teach me about weed. He's an attorney. He's from Washington, D.C. He'd been around the block. He was a smart guy. But he was wrong. At the end, he came up and shook my hand and apologized, and we still keep in touch. You got to understand that here's the statement. That unless you have consumed a THC-based product that was purchased commercially in the last 3 or 4 years, you have no idea what you're talking about. Your construct of what cannabis is so antiquated that it is at best irrelevant. And the reason why I say at best is if we think we know something, we are that much less likely to lean in when somebody says, I'm going to teach you about it. And everybody knows a little bit about weed. So 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes to prove that to you. That unless you've consumed a product that was purchased commercially in the last 3 or 4 years, you don't know what you're talking about. Because that's why this issue matters. Were we talking about the weed of the 70s, the weed my father smoked, even most of what I smoked back in the day, like I wouldn't be here right now. I'd be at home making sure we don't get evacuated from this fire 2 miles from my house. Like I wouldn't be here. But the problem is we're talking about something that the young people aren't consuming and that the industry is not selling. This is an industry that is built around the sale of THC. There are 200 and some chemicals inside of the cannabis plant before you light it on fire, 500 and some after you light it on fire. There are 2 of them that really, really, really matter. Why do we care about THC? Anybody? Interactive part. Why does THC matter? Yeah, it's the part that gets you high. It's the, all capitals, the psychoactive component inside of cannabis. Without THC, what do you got? That's the other important chemical. What plant do you have? You have hemp. You have an interesting agricultural product that was kind of demonized for the way that it looks, something that was very important in the founding of our country, and incidentally makes my favorite pair of shoes. You have something that, according to the last Farm Bill, now under 0.3% is anybody can grow it. Ship it around, it's hemp. With THC, you get a thing that gets you high. CBD is the other chemical that matters the most, and that's because that's where the medicinal properties are. And listen, bottom line, there is absolutely medicine inside of cannabis. There just is. Antipsychotic properties, anti-seizure properties, and probably some other interesting things that we'll find out more and more about. There's medicine inside of that. But let me be abundantly and perfectly clear to you. You don't smoke medicine. Ever. Period. Never in the history of humankind has some like leader in the community been like, you know the best way to get that inside of your system? You should dry it up, roll it up, and inhale it. That's the best way to get that medicine inside of your system. Medicine is not and has never been smoked. But there are components inside of it. So THC is the part that gets you high. Follow me if you will. Am I okay doing this, David? Okay. Follow me if you will on these next 2 slides are all you got to watch. If you don't catch anything else from this presentation, that's fine. Just catch these next 2 slides. These data will never be continued, unfortunately, past where they are because the previous administration discontinued this program and this one has continued with it. In fact, won't allow them to continue testing. But this is the University of Mississippi, and this is a representative sample of all 50 states' collection of cannabis over a 50-year period. And what they've done, the same people on the same equipment since 1960 has measured THC, among other things, but this is the one that matters for this purpose. And I want to show you 3 things here. The first, see this line? How many of you guys have heard the it's natural thing? Weed's natural. Right, okay. It is. We have found preserved samples of this mummified in Asia and Africa. It was important enough that people got buried with it. All right? Humankind has interacted with cannabis forever. Since we appeared or crawled out of the ocean or walked out of the garden, we have interacted with cannabis. And what we see here is what cannabis has looked like for the last 3,000 known years. Were this line to extend to perpetuity around this room, it would look the same. Because what naturally occurs inside of cannabis is between 0.2 and 0.5% THC. We know this. That this natural substance, there occurs more, there were some higher ones, particularly associated with some religious traditions in the Middle East, as well as in some island nations, but this has always been sub 1% THC, always. So first lesson, what naturally occurs inside of cannabis is less than 0.5% THC. Second lesson, we like to get high. in this country. I mean, this is a country that supersizes its Big Macs, right? Like, if one is good, you better believe two is better. And it's cool now that we're learning. I can actually like tell you what happened here to spike this, and then that's just good botany. This is good farming. We got better at growing it. So over the course of 50 years, what you see here is our country's appreciation of and desire to get high. Because the more THC you got, the higher you get. Almost. Here's your 201 lesson, and the last thing I want to teach you is it's not so much about just the level of THC. Really, it's about the delta between the CBD and the THC. So the CBD, in addition to the anti-seizure and things like this, it is an antipsychotic. So CBD has always kept THC in check. This is incredibly important. It's why when we go back through the literature and we look for traditional examples of THC or of cannabis and psychosis, they're there, but they're kind of hard to find. And there's some fairly extreme cases. It's because CBD has always kept it in check. So picture, if you would, let's pretend like my body is one big, great, big, giant cannabis plant. And the THC is my big toe, and the CBD is my big toe. And the CBD is the responsible big brother. The THC is kind of the crazy one. He's like, you know what we ought to do? We ought to set our hair on fire, run down the street, throw a brick through that cop car, and then take a leak off the courthouse. And CBD's like, you know, why don't we do our homework? Why don't we tell mom we love her? Why don't we and it's always kept it in check. But as the THC's grown, and when you'll see the percentages that we're at in a moment, it's become harder and harder and harder for that voice of CBD reason to keep the THC in check. The gap has grown. Those are the three things from this. Now, again, please, just one thing. Please stop anything just to watch this slide. This is 50 years, increments of 2.5%. This Colorado is blue. And again, we will never have a continuation of those data past 2015 because the politics of it all. There's no centralized repository. There's no collection site that we have where we test this, not nationally, not at the state level. But I want you to look at what happened here. When we see this at 0.2% in 1960, ending here at 42% in 2015 as an average, we had better recognize that this plant has become a drug. And unless you've had experience with this drug, listen, I don't want to sound coarse, or I don't care what you did in the 70s. However many times you saw Joe Walsh and you were smoking a doobie during that thing, and you did, it's the same thing with me listening to that Cypress Hill album. It doesn't matter because I wasn't using this. And this one thing, if this would make it to the halls of the United States Senate, and if they could see this information, but there's a vested interest in not teaching what happens when you go from good gardening to good chemistry. A good chemist, somebody with a PhD in these things in Colorado, can make $450,000, $500,000. That's just the chemists. That's not even the folks who own it. So we're going to talk about the market forces, and don't worry. Before I talk about the market forces, questions, because I'm dying to tell you the why on this. Questions though before I go on. Okay.
So has that hit the Senate floor yet?
No. Jeff Sessions wrote me a really nice letter after he read my book, and he said, we're going to get this information out into the world, and then something happened there. I don't know what. That was a joke about Jeff Sessions getting come. Oh my, yes. And they're all cited to the point at the end to allow for continuing medical education. So, what happens and why? Here's the why. It's going to seem a little rabbit traily, but it's not, I promise. Please, 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 just listen to this. Okay, who else works in treatment and prevention around here? Anybody? Well, that counts. Look how far we've come as a country. Look how far we've come when I say this. You guys fill in the blank, anybody. Addiction is a disease. Addiction is a disease. Addiction is not a moral failing. Addiction is not, it is a disease. And just like any other disease, you must have criteria for it. Because the insurance companies, if we walked around and we were like, hey, let me see your playlist. Oh, look at all that Led Zeppelin. Addict. You came here in an El Camino? Addict. Oh, you're a school teacher and you drive a minivan. You're totally good. We can't arbitrarily assign addiction. We have to use objective diagnostic criteria. There are 11. And these 11 criteria apply to cannabis use disorder as well. So diagnosing addiction is objective. It's objective. We can't just walk around and do it. Okay? So these criteria, I'm not going to get into, but if you meet 2 or 3, mild, 4 or 5, moderate, 6 or more severe. 1, don't worry, we're coming back to it. 2, the DSM-5, which was published 3 years ago. So this is the manual that doctors and mental health professionals use for the objective diagnostic criteria. This is the manual they use to say, here's the ICD-6 code, here's that we can bill insurance with. These are the criteria for schizophrenia. 3 years ago, they included cannabis withdrawal. Oh, who gave the audible there? Was that you? Because that's the appropriate response to it. Because if 10 years ago I said to you, here's what physical withdrawal from cannabis looks like. Okay, here's what cannabis withdrawal looks like. What? Like Yanni's music sucks again and you eat way fewer Cheetos? Like, is that withdrawal from? I've seen Yanni 3 times live, and the last time I saw him sober, and I was like, what in the hell? Like this sucks. But the other 2 times I saw him, boy, I was on Mars, man. The fact that physical withdrawal from cannabis is a thing. And this is the other deal. We'll tell people, we'll say this, and you'll have like, you have like 22-year-olds and who'll have columnists and stuff be like, nuh-uh. Like, oh, I'm sorry. Do you spend all of your time in inpatient treatment in a medical setting in Colorado? And here's the scary part about this. We don't have a single pharmacologic intervention for it. Everything else we've got. And we also, since we're learning so much about it, we can't predict it. I can tell you a couple things about it. It's worse in women than it is in men. There tends to be a significant resurgence, usually around day 12, which the problem with that is a lot of times that's when a person's commitment to treatment is at its lowest. So you come in, you're fired up. About at day 12, you have a massive, measurable physical resurgence of. It's just that one thing. If I could get a commercial in the Super Bowl and I could figure an eloquent way to say one thing to the entire world, it would be that, hey, you can actually get physically addicted to weed now. And I would hope that everybody would be like, whoa, what? Now, when we opened in 2014, remember what we're talking about here. We're talking about why Colorado did this, okay? When we opened in 2014, we had fewer than 300 licensed cannabis facilities in the state of Colorado. 2017, had been a factor of 4. We'd jumped to almost 1,200. 2019, the last year that we have data for, we have 2,709 licensed facilities, up from 300 in a period of 5 years. Econ 101. Hey, the bottom line, any of you guys read Freakonomics? The bottom line is that financial incentives drive everything. Wu-Tang had it right at the beginning, cream. Cash rules everything around me, everything. You want to find out the why? Who's getting paid? So we say, how can Colorado support this amount of retail? And I will tell you, we can support that amount of retail because we have a consumer base for it. And how does that growth continue? The consumer base must grow. And there are two ways, only two. Convert current users to more frequent users, capture new users. That's it. Who are those users? Anybody? Who's buying this? Sure. 21, unless you got a med card. I'll tell you who it's not. It's not those of you who come out skiing for Breckenridge on the weekend and buy a pack of gummies on your way up. There's an old rule. SAMHSA has 60 years of data proving to us that about 80% of the booze in this country is consumed by about 20% of the consumers. 80-20 we refer to it as. It's actually the same thing with tobacco. That means the alcohol industry doesn't care in the slightest about my wife and her like 4 margaritas a year and glass of wine once a month. You know who they loved? A dude who found Mad Dog 2020 when he was 12 years old. I mattered. In Colorado, we have data. And no one should be surprised that 84% of the THC in Colorado is being consumed by 20% of the consumers. Who are those people? I'll tell you what they look like. They look like folks who meet the diagnostic criteria for severe substance use disorder. They look like people who have a diagnosable addiction to, because anytime you sell something with addictive potential, I don't care what it is, tobacco, alcohol, pornography, it doesn't matter. The people who are going to consume the most of it are the problemed users. And what we have done in this country forever is laws are made by well put together, don't have issues kind of guys in Washington that affect the people like us. We don't think about the end result and who we are hurting with this. THC in addiction is not at all easy to treat. First and foremost, because half of the time when you say it, people are like, addicted to weed? Do you guys, no hands. Think about somebody you know who's got a problem with THC. Probably you know somebody. The mechanisms to reinforce everything that they believe that surround them are vast. Their social media groups, their music, their TV, their friends, everything says, you're cool. This is just what we do. It's just weed, man. So by the time a person actually gets to a point where they say, I need help, I need to stop using weed, I want you to imagine for a minute what the social forces are like around them. Because if I say, I gotta kick dope, I gotta quit smoking meth, I gotta hang the bottle up, every single person in this room is gonna give me a hug and clap me on the back and be like, you got it, brother, you got it, come on. Because we all know it's a thing. But when I say I gotta quit weed, you got half of the people, you got doctors when they show up in treatment being like, you what? Because they haven't kept up with the last couple of years. You got therapists who are committing microaggression after microaggression, like, you're not here for a real drug. It's only weed? And the grit that it takes these folks to stick with it and say, no, treat me, is pretty cool to watch. It often requires much longer stays in treatment, as well as antipsychotic medications. That's one of the consistents. Almost always we've got to treat with short-term antipsychotic medications. And the amount of treatment, you guys know the way insurance plays this. We can never have enough time to treat them, but we never, ever get enough time to treat them. So traditional rates of addiction, of cannabis use disorder, were around 10%. Of everybody who ever tried, 10% would come up with a clinically diagnosable cannabis use disorder. That has changed. This just came out in October, but it's a meta-study, so it's backing up studies we've seen forever. Dr. Volkov at NIDA told me 3 years ago, she said, it's ridiculous that we keep using 10%. It is 40 or 50. We just don't have the data yet. But we now have absolute data, journal published, peer reviewed, that we see it reaching as high as 30%. That means that as many as 1/3 of everyone who is exposed to today's THC will at some point develop a diagnosable dependence on it. Like jumping up and down, pressing the button. And then the biggest issue we've got, we'll see in a minute, is how negatively this affects our mental health. You see that in a second. Many of those addicted require physical detox as well as medical intervention. So, you want to build that person? Any guesses on how large the cannabis industry is in North America? It's really hard to measure if there's what we call white market, gray market, and black market. White market is everything is taxed from the growth all the way up to the sale. Gray market is only certain components of that are taxed, and black market is none of it is taxed. All of them have grown in all the legal states, Colorado, California. Black market's through the roof in Colorado right now. It's incredible. But white market, only white market, again, a little bit tricky to quantify, was probably $22 billion in North America. Billion. Yo, you know how much money we bought in milk last year? Come on, Iowa. 6 billion. If you have zeros that big, if there is that much money to be made, you had better believe that there are some very, very rich, very, very smart dudes sitting in deep leather chairs in the back of some room being like, how can we make more? And I'm going to tell you, it's the same way they do it with tobacco and alcohol. You make more by selling more to that 84% who's consuming it, the people who meet the diagnostic criteria. And if you want to build somebody who meets the diagnostic criteria, there are 4 ways. There are 4 things that you do to get somebody addicted. The first one we can't control yet. I don't know, they're probably doing it over in Asia somewhere, but genetic susceptibility. We have no control over genetic susceptibility. The others are age of onset, frequency of use, and potency. If you want to build a lifetime chronic user or good customer, age of onset, frequency of use, and THC potency, get them started anytime pre-adult. What is adulthood when it comes to substance use? Come on. Frontal lobe myelination. Yeah, 25, 26. Yeah. For women, 23-ish. For men, 25, 26. If we waited, the difference there is having your frontal lobe fully prepared and protected and able to handle stuff. I'm not going to get into the details of it, but 25, 26. Anytime before that, anything more than once or twice a month, and anything above 10%. If we can get you using that, oh yeah, we can count on you. So, quick run through Colorado, and before your lawmaker minds and law enforcement minds and things go to it, I mean, please feel free to ask, but I'll tell you, yes, a decent portion of this shouldn't be happening. A decent portion. A lot of it is legal, because the very first thing that happened, January 4th, we had a free speech infringement lawsuit filed against the state by folks who said, why can't we advertise? Even though it was written into the Amendment 64 and they won. But there's no mechanism to enforce this. You know, it's funny, everybody's like, hey, let's free up law enforcement's time to do important stuff so that they stop, you know, banging down doors and arresting people with dime bags. Because I met so many of y'all who spend your time doing that. What ends up happening is you get inundated with THC issues, so you can't enforce the laws that are on the books. So, let me take you on a real quick tour through Colorado. I have 600 of these photographs on my computer, but here's just a couple fun ones. That is actually Cookie Monster with a plate full of dope on the side of a dispensary. Those dudes got a cease and desist from Sesame Street. These are candy bars obviously made to look exactly like Buddha Finger, Keef Cat, Twixt. Go to the App Store and check out the Kushmoji set. These are all cannabis-related emojis. Clearly not for grown. Go to get weed maps on your phone. We were talking yesterday. I was telling folks how delivery works and the workaround that delivery is. Iowa has medical delivery, by the way, now. And if you get on your weed maps app, you can see where everything is and get your things. Hey, check this out. This is wonderful. That's a back-to-school special with a half-naked woman. But wait. This is the Boulder Daily Camera. All right, this isn't some fringe paper. This is my paper. And they give a copy of this to every kid going to high school and junior high because we're an open enrollment community. And so this is middle school and high school open house dates, and then the whole thing is filled with summaries of those schools. This one's got the best band, this one's got the best theater, you know what I mean? So they give it to every kid. So 2 years ago when my daughter gets this, given to her at school, she comes home and she's like, check this out, Dad. This is the first page. First, I thought it was an ad for Starbucks, but then I looked and it's actually an ad for Starbuds. Right. You know what? That guy should win an award because he got it in front of every juvenile eye in my county and he co-branded it with something that they all know and love, Starbucks. He probably did get an award. Here's a move-in special at CU Boulder, clearly targeting freshmen and sophomores. Here's a spring break advertisement at CU Boulder. Here's Santa Claus with a bag full of dope telling you get 10% off when you bring your family. There, we got rid of baby Jesus and we replaced it with a dab rig. Here is smoke weed every day. This campaign ran for 3 years in Colorado. I don't care how myelinated your frontal lobe is. Do not smoke weed every day. Especially this stuff. It actually changes the physical structure of one's brain. It's crazy. We can show you. We have pictures. We can show you an MRI. Loss of gray matter, white matter, connective tissue, and it actually looks like a shrinking without resurgence of the frontal lobe. A shrinking of the frontal lobe. Now imagine if I said that about my hand. Like it changes the physical structure of my hand. I was like, I'm smoking weed. And I'm like, I would stop smoking weed, but just because we can't see our brain. Frequency. Don't forget to dabble daily. That's the verb for dab. We will discuss that in just a moment. We got pre-rolls. We said, listen, do it everywhere. These advertisements are all over the place. Get high and go skiing. Get high and go climbing. Get high and go to concerts. Get high and go to work. Get high, get high, get high. And don't forget to use the hard stuff. Dear Stoner, this is a column that we have in the paper. How can I easily request the highest potency strains of a product? And he said, oh, don't worry. Bud tenders are trained to have their most potent products at the ready when asked for a suggestion. Now listen, you square this up against the people who are saying, writing the laws and being like, no, we just want responsible adult use. Responsible adult use. My ass, you want responsible adult use, because I go into these dispensaries. And I ask them, I haven't smoked in 24 years. What should I use? Yo, this is going to knock your socks off, man. That's what you need. It's not about casual and simple adult use. It is about selling and profiting off of addiction. Period. Stop! And here we are, rolling ahead with it. You know, we let Purdue get away with it for 15 years? Before we started paying attention? And let me tell you, man, this messaging right here, when I get called, and I get called every week, can you please sit down with my kid? These are just buddies, not even like, can you sit down with my brother? Can you have a conversation with this kid? Can you talk to these kids in class? And I go, sure. When I come with a message that is counter to weed is the greatest thing in the world, what I got to deal with right away is, all right, whatever, old man. The teddy bear riding the roster rocket over the Flatirons has been telling us to stay high since we could remember. Like, well, you got a good freaking point. I guess what I need to go with now is a message of harm reduction and attempting to get you to consume less frequently and less potent stuff and hope that your little brains turn out. I want to talk about consumption trends. Before I do that, how about market forces? Anything? You've gotten this much. Anybody want to guess where the most dispensaries in all of Colorado are located? Some of y'all know the state. The highest per capita dispensaries we have in Colorado is a community called Globeville. is 84% African American, 10% Hispanic. The average income is $28,000, and there's one dispensary for every 35 people. Social justice? I got your social justice. Hey, anybody want to guess how many African American dispensary owners there are in the entire state of Colorado? 2. Nice job, Sheriff. Did you know that, or did you just guess that? Clearly, vote Tilton. Like that. Wow. Yeah, 2. There are 2 out of the 2,700 we got. Here's another fun one for you. 80% of all of the licenses in the state of Colorado are held by 8 men. I can describe them to you. They look just like me. Only they got a lot more money. They're rich, straight, white men. Period. That's who owns it. That's not who's using it. But that's what we do. We profit on addiction, on the backs of the most vulnerable. And the most vulnerable in this society are the mentally ill, which I'll show you in a minute. Okay, concentrates, edibles, and vaping. Hey, what time do I stop, David? Yes! I'm not going to do a bathroom break. Take a break if you need to, please. But first we're going to talk about concentrates. Who's familiar? Show of hands. Yeah, I'm sure all you boys are. Edibles and vaping. Here's the reason why concentrates are so important. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to show you in the next 15 minutes. And if I don't take a couple minutes to show you the market behind it, you're going to write it off. You're going to be like, that's crazy, that's fringe, nobody's actually doing that. This is the thing that I just the pictures, if somebody could pass this, I wrote something once for the journal Alcohol that went to every member in the Senate, but we weren't able to put pictures in it. If people could just see these pictures, I feel like we changed the conversation, because this is what people are consuming. So before I start teaching you about it, the Lancet study, February 2015, Volume 2, Number 3, The Effects of High-Potency Cannabis on Psychosis, published in the Lancet Journal and followed up every year since. So we've had 5 years of follow-ups on this. We've been watching the same cohort. And what we have done is we use 16% potency as a benchmark for high potency. Not a benchmark, a high point. It was 12 to 16% potency was what we were looking at. And it's 16% potency. And the reason why it matters so much is humankind hasn't studied more than that. We can't tell you what happens at 20% THC potency. We just can't. We will soon. There's a couple people working on it, but we can't right now. We see it 16% daily use, which is defined as 5 times a week. Daily use results in increase in psychosis that's 5-fold. Weekend use, which is twice a week, results in psychosis that is 3-fold. And 1/4 of all of the psychosis in this study, it was causal. We got this old question, causation, correlation. Do people get crazy because they smoke weed, or do crazy people smoke weed to quiet down the crazy? I know for me, it ended, I had a major depressive disorder. And I didn't know I had a major depressive disorder because it was the 90s and you didn't talk about that kind of thing. And I got high and maybe it stopped it. And the trauma, and now we have this word for trauma. Back then we just thought it was life. That guy got shot and I was standing right there and okay. Some of you guys remember what it was like in Washington back then? The freaking mayor got caught smoking crack with a hooker and we reelected him. We were like, yo, Marion. He understood us. He was one of us. 1/4 of all of psychosis is determined without question to be causal. If I cut those numbers by 1/3 and told you that they were in a chemical inside of this water bottle, the sale of this water bottle would be banned by dinner time. But because it's weed, and nobody wants to question weed, I got a big poster in my office at home, that old Mark Twain quote that says, "Sacred cows make the best hamburger." Since nobody wants to question this one, we let this stuff fly. This is empirical. This is journal published and peer reviewed. This isn't the debatable stuff. This is real information. This is ruining brains. Ralph Morgan, not 2016, sorry. In 2016, Ralph Morgan, the then CEO of a company called Open Vape, who made $400 million that year, I wrote about him in my book, said in the Denver Post, Colorado will sell more concentrates by 2017 than the flower. I see it becoming a part of people's daily regimen. Let me break down what that means to you. That we will sell more of what I'm about to teach you about than when I think about weed, what do you think about? I hope you think about the cover of the Dre album. It was a really good album. I hope you think about a green leafy plant, right? Right. You think about a green leafy plant. He's saying that we're going to sell more of this by then, and he was right. So we publish a report every year in Colorado, the Department of Marijuana Enforcement. In 2014, the word concentrate, this is 100% my own research, I've gone through it all word by word. In 2014, the word concentrate or any variation of concentrate is found nowhere inside the report. 2015, only to say about 4% of all the concentrates have unacceptably high levels of pesticides in them, and we shouldn't be selling them. 2016, still nothing. And then 2017, there's one page, and at the bottom of it, it says that Colorado sold 27,890 pounds of concentrates, which totaled 4.5 million units. In 2019, we just got these data. It jumped to 40,229 pounds. Now, those of you who know weed, I hope our men and y'all are like, all right, 40,000 pounds, that's a bit of weed. Not what it is in concentrates. You can't read this. This is an advertisement by a concentrate manufacturer. It says, more is not better. Cannabis concentrates are potent. Start by consuming a small dose, about half the size of a pinhead or less. And we sold 40,000 pounds of that. Ralph was absolutely right. By 30%, we have outpaced the sales of flower by concentrates. We sell 30% more concentrates by value than we do flower. That means, in the state of Colorado, concentrates are weed. And to the young people, they're weed. So let me just read this to you. Prevention. Dave, did I have this ad last time you saw it? All right, listen to this, those of you in prevention. This is Denver Post. Crack is back. Crack is whack. Crack kills. Say no to crack. Sound familiar? Well, kids, I'm here to tell you that not all crack is bad. Some crack is actually really, really good. So when I called the editor at the Denver Post, a friend of mine, when I called Greg and I said, hey man, that's not funny. Like you said, hey kids, I'm here to tell you. He was like, Ben, you got it? Come on, it's tongue in cheek. You got to chill out. And I was like, whoa, tongue in cheek. You literally, and I mean literally, I hate it when people use that word wrong. I heard somebody on the radio the other day be like, I literally died. I was like, yeah, really, congratulations on the second coming. Yeah. I said, you literally say, well, kids, I'm here to tell you not all crack is bad? You're talking about crack weed. Put it into Google. Put it into YouTube. Crack weed. We are talking about THC concentrations of up to 99.9% pure. Where does our knowledge stop? Who is paying attention? 16. What that is doing to the human brain and body, I don't know, but it's not good. So I really do actually try to stay a lot more moderate than I might be sounding here. You do your thing, you're an adult, don't smoke, or don't let kids see you, don't drive, do your thing. But I will tell you right now, concentrates have absolutely no place in the world until we have a better idea of what they're doing to the human brain and body. And these are what we are selling more of in Colorado than the flower. And the reason why is so simple. I'm not going to show this to you, but I'm leaving this presentation. Here's the why. Those of you who are more mechanically minded will appreciate it. Essentially what you do is you push a solvent through a lot of organic material, and what comes out at the end is the solvent and the THC. You use a solvent to strip it through butane, isopropyl. Everclear is great. Propane is really good. There's a bunch of ways you can do it. And then you purge the solvent from, and what you're left with is just THC. I'm not going to show you the making of and the things like that. You can also build a closed loop extraction system. These are actually for sale. I can buy beginner education and advanced consulting. I can buy this in Colorado for $2,300. You can use gravity far and away the cleanest way to do it, but also the least efficient. The reason I got the other one, and I'm not going to do it because I'm going to skip it, and the reason why concentrates are what they are like simple. It's really it's simple. It's tolerance. You don't have an infinite tolerance to opiates. Why not? Because eventually you get to a point where your heart stops beating. Eventually you get to a point where you don't breathe anymore and you die. You don't have an infinite tolerance to alcohol for the same reason, to benzodiazepines for the same reason, to amphetamines for the same reason, because eventually you get to a point where your body's like, tap out. Since that doesn't happen with THC, what you have, so you have cannabidiol receptors that go every single part of your body. Your skin, your brain, your nervous system, your muscular system, just not in your skeletal system, you have cannabidiol receptors. So it's a hole that fits the cannabis key. The cannabis key fits it. So what happens with these concentrates of THC is we absolutely overwhelm those receptors, and so we push tolerance higher and higher and higher and higher and higher and higher until eventually there is no high except for with these things. So I'm going to show you this video, and then I'm going to show you a great and amazing video that will illustrate both of those. The reason why I like this one so much, and again, like, you go to YouTube, kids are so freaking stupid. Everything's on YouTube. Everything. Like, I mean, you could, really, everything. So type in dabbing and look. The reason I like this one, so this is a dispensary in Colorado. You can't smoke in dispensaries, but obviously are. This surveillance footage. And it's a very large man. He's not a small dude. So he takes a concentrate hit. That's weed. So traditionally what cannabis does is cannabis is associated with a decrease in blood pressure and a decrease in heart rate. And these concentrates are a massive spike in both. So you have to have, the first bunch of times you use it, you have to have a spotter. I'm not kidding. Look this up. Because you're going to hit it and you're going to fall out. And then what happens, and this is the best part, this is why I love this one right here, because it's so instructive. Here's your homework for tonight. Watch this guy's YouTube channel. He's called Stoners Are Weed. And he has a YouTube channel called Kill a Friend Day. And what Kill a Friend Day does is he gives dedicated cannabis consumers their first concentrate hit, and he films it. And it's amazing. Because what you see throughout, you see examples of acute psychosis, you see examples of psychotic break that take place in it, and you see a lot of passing out and falling over and people needing to stop. But so what he's going to do here, and why I love to show this to you, the big guy is Stoners Are Weed. So he's going to take a really healthy concentrate hit. I want you to notice a couple things. One, he clears that tube like a champ. Doesn't even cough. We don't have the volume on because we're in a church and the language is pretty colorful. No change in affect. See this dude? I mean, that might be like the corners of his, oh, look there. He's got a smile. No change in affect. Because this is what he needs to do to get to normal. I work inside of this world, and I treat these guys every day, and they can't get to normal without doing that. You saw what it did to that dude in the store? Watch what it does to this guy. Again, a buddy of his, who he smokes weed with all the time, who he's like, yo, let's take your first concentrate hit. And now look at this. This kind of thing would get you beat up where I'm from. He clears like a third of the tube. So he actually, and this is interesting, I'll kind of side note it for a minute because I can't jump ahead, but he's coughing and he's saying, I can't breathe in between it. There is absolutely, for our first responders, there's absolutely anaphylaxis associated with THC consumption. It's small, but it's there. It's peanut-ish. So there are people who can have acute anaphylactic responses to THC. And that's a big deal. And who knows if he's doing that, but he's like, I can't breathe, I can't breathe, I can't breathe. So once we get the puke moving and out, remember how much of that he consumed. And remember watching the other dude not even move. So here's the interesting thing, and I think especially for law enforcement and anybody else on the front line, the reason why I like this one is he does not present at all like he's intoxicated on THC. He presents like somebody who's intoxicated on a synthetic. Watch. We start to see obsessive tactile behavior. He's just about done convulsing, and once he's done convulsing, then he'll... Again, when you watch it, I want you to have the volume up, and when you watch the rest of these, have the volume up. That's not what you think about when you think about weed. You think about somebody getting high on weed, and you think about them sitting down and watching Dazed and Confused and giggling, not making a sand angel in a pile of their own vomit. We, us, our law enforcement, our elected officials, our treatment industry professionals, our caring parents, our people who actually care, are doing our very best to try to talk to people about how it's not super safe to drive. And when I was a kid, this was how we did it. And we're trying to tell them what it was like going around town at 20 miles an hour in a Model T. And from go, they've been ripping at 220 in a Bugatti. And we're sitting back here, we're like, why am I not getting through to them? What's the disconnect? The disconnect is that we are talking about a thing that they haven't used in years. However, since the vernacular has not yet caught up with it, we say weed, they think of everything from hemp to concentrates. When I was a kid, if I went down to the 203 and I got one nug like that in my sack, you know how happy I was? Because, boy, that was weed. Today, it's butter, and it's wax, and it's shatter. In Colorado, by the numbers, this is weed. It's not a green organic material, and this is the core of the industry. And this is why every single state who has attempted a THC limit has been just annihilated in it. Because the industry's like, we just want to sell weed. Come on, it's just weed. Woo, we just want to sell, everything's totally cool. Bro, chill out, it's just weed. Why don't you stop locking so many people up? It's just weed. And in the back rooms, they're like, damn, if we don't get that concentrate out there, ain't nobody getting paid. That's weed. Again, I have hundreds of these photographs of different examples of it that I'm not getting into. This is called live resin. This is called a shatter, probably the most intense. This is a different form of live resin. I had to call a sponsee and find out what that was. This is a reverse osmosis extracted THC that's 60 to 72% that's inhalable. There's Gorilla Glue, Bruce Banner. These are all names of weed strains, but these are glues that are made out of them. This is the future of THC consumption. Every dispensary I go into, it's on the counter, everything. This is called a distillate. This is what a distillate looks like before it's cooled. Can you imagine the amount of scientific acumen it takes to go from a green organic material to that? So what this is, and if I had a board, I'd draw you a cool little thing. That's not just THC. That's THC separated at the submolecular level to isolate the delta 9 THC. So if you know, there's the chemical stuff gets interesting, but the delta 9 is the part of, so the THC is the part that gets you high, right? The delta 9 is like the Mike Tyson when he went off the end part of the THC. That's like the biting people's ears off and pulling people out of cars parts of THC. And what we've done is isolated that. This is what it looks like when it cools. Good people of Iowa, is that weed? Nope. You ask the kids. You ask the people writing the bills. Because in the state of Colorado, cannabis is defined as every salt, derivative, extract of, and concentrate from the cannabis plant. And every single proposed law since has included that exact definition. Every salt, derivative, extract of, and concentrate from the cannabis plant. To allow for the sale of this. That's the end goal. You see this? THC in a syringe? Yep. That's weed. And our problem is, see, we think it's this little mom and pop business, right? I love this. Powered by science, fueled by nature. 710 is oil spelled upside down, so keep an eye out for 710. Talk to the kids wearing that. We still have this narrative. Are you going back to nature? Don't forget your natural cannabis or your concentrate headquarters. All over Denver. First one's free. Hey man, I've been around. And I knew some other cats who played that first thing. Played that. The idea that this is where it's gotten to in 6 years should wake everybody up. Because right now we still think, any of y'all follow South Park? God, I hope some of y'all follow South Park. See Integrity Farms this last year. Randy has a weed farm and it's amazing. And everybody thinks that's what it is. Everybody thinks it's mom and pop, like down on the farm. Like, well, hell, crops coming in good this year. When it's Walmart and Monsanto and Nestle. You remember that old thing? The greatest trick that the devil ever pulled off was convincing the world he didn't exist. The greatest trick this industry has ever pulled off is making us think that they're not a thing. The money that they're spending on K Street lobbyists right now with the Marijuana Policy Project, the Drug Policy Alliance, Safer Normal, the war chests that those guys have and are putting into this, no wonder it happens. Concentrates. Here's everything you need to know about vaping. Is they're potent and discreet. And pretty much everything that's being vaped is a concentrate. Pretty much across the board. So vaping, the reason why it's so handy is that there's no smoke, no smell, no mess. You can vape anytime you want with impunity. Amazing fun flavors and no cannabis smell. Trying to encourage your kids in an environment like the one that I live in is tough. And where I've set in the hopes that they don't do similar stuff to I am, if my kids make it through high school with no use of tobacco, drugs, or alcohol, they get a trip anywhere in the world they want to go. Figure it's a hell of a lot cheaper than rehab. And so my daughter, who now is a junior, is unabashed, lovely, she's just the most amazing little thing. And she's frank about her decision not to use anything. Because in Boulder County, you better be frank. Because everybody is using. You know, at the beginning I said most of y'all haven't used, most of them have there. So last year, pre-COVID, she goes to this culinary thing 2 days a week. And it's kids from a bunch of different schools. And she's learning like commercial baking and stuff like this. And the kids, at the beginning of the year, the joke was they'd all hit their THC vapes when the teacher would leave the room. So every time the teacher took a bathroom break, everybody's hitting their THC. And then by about the middle of the year, whenever the teacher turns around, they're hitting it. That's the thing. And then this is the challenge. It's a YouTube challenge you got to look at to get your teacher to charge your THC vape. Because they look like they're so disguised and so into other things. But again, amazing fun flavors, no cannabis smell. So my daughter, who's been very cool about this and vocal and everything, one day she gets assigned to a group and they had to do a project together. And the one girl's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. Everybody take a hit. We'll give it 15 minutes. We'll get super creative. It'll be cool. It's sophomore, right? And there are 4 people in the group. The other 3 hit it. She hands it to my daughter. My daughter says, no, thank you. We practice this stuff at home. If you got kids, practice this at home. She said, no, thank you. And the girl goes, oh, come on, Chloe. It's just weed. I'm not kidding. My daughter's calling me crying from the bathroom telling me the story. And I'm like, oh, I have to tell the world this one. And she goes, no, thank you. And she goes, well, if you're scared about it, it's birthday cake flavor. And so my daughter, what we do and what we have practiced is she escalates. She says, I don't want any. And the girl goes, and pardon me, pastors and probably the Almighty, and then she goes, Chloe, don't be such a little bitch. It's just weed. My daughter stands up and goes, I don't want your drugs. Of course, the teacher comes over. The next day, she calls me crying from the bathroom when the teacher leaves the room and 4 kids in unison hit their thing, stand up, and go blow it on her. And she goes, am I going to get high? Did I break the promise? That permeated. Relax. It's just weed. That is a functional pen. And you better believe if I were still getting high and y'all pulled me over and didn't see it, I would try to sign my ticket with that pen. I had somebody in a documentary once hand me that pen to sign a release for the documentary. And he was in a hospital where I confiscated the pen. And he was like, you can't take my pen. I was like, you can't bring contraband into a hospital. This cup that heats to 700 degrees is great for the home or the office or on the go. There's a lighter THC specific. Here's an asthma inhaler. Listen, it's like everything. There's just not enough examples. And there's your classic bubblegum flavor. Why? Because that's fun. Edibles. So 10 milligrams is the legal dose in Colorado. And this is the problem. This is the problem between the people who are making the rules, enforcing the rules, and the people who just don't understand and are consuming. 10 milligrams is a legal dose inside of Colorado. But we don't specify, nor does anybody else, how many servings you can have in one package. So this is a pack of gummy bears by a company called Edipure. And this isn't like a gummy bear light kind of thing. This is what we call a repurposed candy. That's a thing. It means it's a gummy bear purchased in bulk, infused with a concentrated THC, and resold. Yeah. There are 10 of them in the container. 10 milligrams is a legal serving. What's the implication? Yes. No. They come with a little warning on the back that say, don't forget to separate each gummy bear into tenths because each gummy bear contains 100 milligrams. That's nothing. Nothing. We have figured out in the last 2 years how to put distillates into these. Remember what a distillate was? The pure Delta 9 THC. We are putting distillates into them right now. So weight goes out the window. So 10 milligrams, what's that matter? Because it's the same weight as it would be if I baked a brownie and put 10 milligrams of organic material in it, or if I made a distillate and put 100 milligrams of distillate in it. And you know who's not paying any attention? And this is where I wish somebody would get pissed at the national level. There's zero FDA oversight over this. Zero. This is the American food supply. And there's zero. It's left to the states who don't have an infrastructure to do this. So you got 100 milligrams of distillate in this. Check this one out. That's a graham cracker. I went and bought it. It's popped up as a geolocator on my weed maps. It's the size of a graham cracker, and it's 1,000 milligrams. There are 100 servings in this. A little warning that says, don't forget to separate into hundreds. Check this out. These all have 1,000 milligrams. 100 legal servings in a cake pop. In a soda. I ask again, is this for the responsible adult? Gee, I think tonight on my way home I'm going to pick up a Merlot. No, maybe a nice sativa. No! That's for a child! Period. Because that's where the money's at, man. I love this. Says, these cannabis products might surprise you. Coffee, post-tattoo ointment, toothpaste, vaginal suppositories. The staggering variety begs the question, what can't we infuse? And I will tell you right now that you can't imagine one thing. If you do, hit me with it right now and I'll show you a picture. You can't imagine one thing that could be introduced into the human body that's not being commercially produced with THC in it. You can't imagine one. With no FDA oversight. None. Because to oversee it, they'd be complicit in violating federal law. Condiments, barbecue sauce, ketchup, weed coffee, K-cup coffee. Here's a THC lemonade mix. Here's THC ice cream and THC hard candies. There's THC granola bars. Here's a THC nasal mist I can take and nobody will be any the wiser from that. Here's a THC topical intoxicating cream. It goes through all 3 layers of my skin into my bloodstream to get me high. This isn't a pain relief sort of see at the mall CBD kind of a deal. This is a get you high topical. You know what's going on here biologically? Here's a THC pill. You know, a kid comes home and you're like, are you high? Hang on. Well, honey, he doesn't smell like anything. Well, maybe that's because he was sucking on a THC lollipop. Or because they had just had some THC tea. Or a gummy bear. Or clearly made to look like a Reese's with 100 milligrams of THC in it. Check this out. This isn't fake. One of the things that pissed me off at the beginning was when people were like, oh, look, Marlboro is going to come to... Of course, Altria and all these people now own all of these things. But that's not fake. That's real. That's pot rocks. You remember the pop rocks? That's pot rocks. That's a THC-infused pot. Is that for a grown-up? Sweet tarts. THC-infused alcohol, THC-infused soda. This is great. Put this one into YouTube tonight. Keef Cola. These are one of the largest net worth THC manufacturers in the world right now, the guys who make Keef Cola. 350 milligrams. This, along with 120 milligrams of sugar, contains 35 legal servings of THC, with a little thing on the back that says, that lid is 1/35, so just take 1/35. Put this into YouTube. And watch the kids, because sour diesel soda doesn't appeal to me. Watch the kids not drinking 1/35.
Just looking at the prices, I don't know anything about this, but that seems...
It's an arms race, Joe. It's an arms race. I can get an ounce for $45 now. It's an arms race to get as much intoxicating as you possibly can for as little as you want, because we don't care about you. We're not selling to you when you come to Colorado and go four-wheeling. The only thing we want are the people who are meeting the diagnostic criteria for substance use disorder before they get to my treatment program. So we got to get as much intoxicating as we can for as small an amount of money as we can.
So they're a legal drug cartel.
Oh, yes, this is a cartel. And the cartel, classic cartel, has been enforced by all of this. I wondered why they brought weed anyway. There's more money in meth. Now they're just bringing meth. Has anybody noticed the meth? Has anybody noticed the meth? Mexico has finally figured out they should have been putting more pseudo in the meths from the beginning, and they're sending us up some for real meth right now. Because Mexico's like, well, we don't have to waste time with weed no more.
You mentioned the 2 men in Colorado. Who are they?
Sorry, which two?
The 2 men that own all of the...
8.
Okay. And then where does this come from? You mentioned that, so when you saw kind of the drug czar was here last January, he said that the meth is coming in from China to Mexico in here, but of course then with COVID, it stopped, or the pot being sold in Humboldt, or being grown in Humboldt, Colorado, or where?
In Colorado. This is being grown locally. So it's all moved indoors. That's the other thing. There's this, I have a whole chapter in my book about the environmental impact of it, because it's all grown indoors. So no, it's being grown in Colorado and sold in Colorado. But the last decent estimate we got from the Marijuana Enforcement Division said that we were growing about 40% more than we were taxing, that we knew of. So it's got to end up in the black market. And he's the drug czar, so obviously he knows more, but I think he's oversimplifying. What we have now is a direct supply chain of pseudoephedrine from China to Mexico. They're not making the meth in China. They're just shipping pseudo directly to Mexico, and now Mexico is making real meth. Because up until recently, Mexico, well, until about 5 years ago, it was all end-user driven, and Mexico would cut it down and cut it down and cut it down because pseudo costs so much money, but now they got endless fun. The meth is back because it's taken that supply chain. You know, interestingly, the DEA under HIDTA, high-intensity drug trafficking areas in Southern California, intercepts regularly Colorado-branded weed coming up from Mexico. So Mexico and started branding their weed as coming from Colorado as a marketing edge.
So when you leave Colorado, are there down in California, you know the checkpoints and where they are, and do they have checkpoints when you leave Colorado to see if you're taking this out?
Oh, good Lord, no. This is the thing. This could work in Europe. This could work if we had militarized borders, but what Wyoming, I do a lot of work for Wyoming law enforcement, and Wyoming, like they call us, they refer to Colorado as their Mexico, and there's no, like, what's to stop it? If I could buy an ounce of premium top shelf concentrate in Colorado for $450 with a good coupon. I could get $2,000 for it in Florida. 3 years ago, DEA in Florida, or in Wyoming, 3 years ago, DEA in Florida told me that same thing would be worth $9,000. And for me to get it from there, this is why Iowa has problems. This is why, because you guys are interstate. You've always said you got 70, or you got 80, you got 380. Like everybody knows this about Iowa. Everybody traffics through it. And the thing is, if I want to make a fortune selling weed going from Colorado to an illegal state, like let's say I want to go to South Carolina where I can sell that ounce I bought for $400 for $5,000, I don't need a U-Haul. Because I used to need a U-Haul, and I'd have to hope that I didn't pass anybody who'd ever been around the block or within like 4 miles of a drug dog. But all I need to do now is like hollow out my big book and put 2 pounds of concentrates inside of it and bring it out. Like, and you're looking at, I mean, huge yield. And since they all take credit cards, every one of them takes credit cards, it's an infinite amount. That's your front man. I won't explain what a front man is right now, but look, if you keep up with rap culture, here's a THC syrup. Here's THC juice. There it is. We got THC water. Well, wonders never cease. Mint. What's that? Yes, they just did this too. Baked goods, hot caramels, hot chocolate, candy bars, blah, blah, blah. Liquid, 5-hour energy, caffeine in it. Here's an intoxicating deodorant so that you can stash that in your stuff. Here's a THC breast spray. Here's a THC lube. Intoxicating. Here's a THC infused suppository that I bought. There for a documentary. You should have seen the conversation I had. I'm sure it's on video out there. I think the documentary's on Netflix called Potluck, where I was trying to get the young lady at the dispensary to explain to me how I was only supposed to consume 1/7 of this 70 milligram suppository. If you're too young to have consumed medicine this way, like just wait. You will consume medicine this way at some point. This is from a candy bar I bought last year. I love this. Check this out. This is written on the back of it per Colorado law. Warning, there may be health risks associated with the consumption of this product. This product contains marijuana and its potency was tested within an allowable plus or minus 15% variance. This product was produced without regulatory oversight for health, safety, or efficacy. And you know the narrative that comes out of Colorado is, they nailed it. You want to do it right, see what Colorado's done. They figured everything out. Come to Colorado and see what we figured out. Better yet, have a conversation with any of our cops out there. All right, the real issue, and where I believe, okay, so my generation grew up knowing tobacco caused cancer. Generation before that, not so much. The one before that, God no, you had doctors recommending cigarettes. But when I grew up, it was like, can you believe there was a time when we as well-informed Americans didn't understand that tobacco caused cancer? 5 years from now, maybe 10, this country's going to be in the same place with this. This is going to be the straw that breaks this whole thing. It's the link between THC and psychosis, the THC and mental illness. 5 or 6 years from now, I think collectively as a people, we will be saying, can you believe there was a time when we didn't recognize and respect the link between high potency THC and mental illness? It says back in 2014, but it's good, solid, it's very elegant data, it's why it matters. Casual use of 10% THC potency, saw a risk of depression that was 1.5 times higher. It is causal for acute anxiety. Now, we don't know, it's strongly associated with, but we don't know if it's causal for anxiety disorders. However, if it is causal for acute, one would assume that once we eventually tease the data out, we will see it is causal with long term. We know that use of THC is contraindicated with anxiety disorders, depression, ADHD, and bipolar, big time BPD, as well as PTSD. Contraindicated. That means doctors say, like, whatever you do, don't put these two things together. But all the states voting on it are including these things in conditions. Medicine isn't done by popular vote, people. Worsened outcomes in treating bipolar disorder. One of the most brilliant physicians I know who treats bipolar disorder, Dr. Laura Martin, has said, she said, I don't know why that is, but if any of you have ever known anybody who's had bipolar disorder, you know how hard it is to get the meds right. Always scrambling. She said, I think if people are constantly changing the chemistry of their brain with this THC and everything else in it, we can't keep up with the meds. We can't keep them right. And so what you got to do is get a base. But getting that base usually takes about 6 weeks. In fact, we just treated a young man. It took 6 weeks for us to get him off his antipsychotic drugs so that we could even start looking at what appropriate antidepressants were for him. And his insurance wouldn't pay for it. His family didn't have money. I got to a point where I was just really, really personally interested in the case, and I floated him because I wanted to see what happened. After 6 weeks, we were able to get him off all those other things, stabled on other medications, but he'd been changing his brain chemistry for so long that we couldn't do anything about it. And here it is. This was what did it for NFL. This was what got NFL's attention, that the risk of suicide requiring hospitalization, so that means we can measure it because we can talk to them afterwards because they didn't complete it. But it was serious enough that they went to the hospital, is increased by a factor of 2. The highest rates ever of recorded teen suicide use in Colorado have been the last 4 years. We don't know if that's causal. But I can tell you right now that it's not causal. That you do dumb stuff when you're high. Like driving and making decisions about things. Like, and what if it was only causal in 2 of the cases? I talk in my book about lethality associated with it, and one of the women I talk about, her name's Sally Shendell, Mom Strong, and her son, when he hung himself, he's an Iraq war vet, when he hung himself, the note he said, all it said was, marijuana has stolen my soul and ruined my mind. Sally Shendell, Mom Strong. I'm telling you, put that information against a chemical in one of these things and it's done. People are tripping over each other to stop the sale. Regular use, so this is twice a week, regular use of 12% THC sees an increased risk of psychosis 2-fold. And here's the perfect storm. High potency, so 12 to 16%, frequent use 2 or more times a week, and genetic susceptibility, so the presence of one of those 3 markers, could see an increase of up to 8-fold in psychosis. You know what's not funny is psychosis. Some people call it crazy in the pejorative. I know you guys have seen plenty of psychosis. Has anybody ever seen anyone in a psychotic episode? You tell the story to people and they're like, ha ha ha. I saw a young man once in a THC-induced psychosis rip all of his clothes off and in the middle of a hospital waiting room. Only THC, nothing else. I was there, I treated. I saw the tox screens. Only THC, rips all of his clothes off, stands up on a thing in the waiting room and screaming and flexing about how he's going to kill everybody. Maybe 120 pounds. Not a big dude. But when security came, they were like, okay, he's clearly a threat. We need law enforcement. Law enforcement came, and the very first thing that happened was every hand was on a pistol. Because this kid was about to start attacking people. He ended up getting tased. That's THC-induced psychosis? Yes, meth-induced psychosis, amphetamine-induced psychosis, and THC-induced psychosis, same thing. It's the same stuff that's happening here. And here's the trick with it, is you can have either a psychotic episode where you wake up in the back of a cop car and you're like, oh God, I hope I didn't hurt anybody. Or you can have a psychotic break where things have shifted permanently. And if I could get lawmakers in Colorado to spend a day with me talking to the families of the psychotic breaks that have happened from these. I got to be super careful. I got so many amazing stories, but HIPAA makes them all, especially working with professional sports and things. HIPAA makes so I can't tell any. But I was working with a professional in Colorado, a licensed professional in the state of Colorado, I've smoked for 30 years. I'm sure it's not the weed. In the last year, he'd had 2 assault charges and a DV charge. And he's a licensed professional. He's obviously losing his license, everything. And so I'm like, well, you've been smoking weed for 40 years. What's changed? He's like, nothing. I just am still smoking weed. I'm like, you're smoking the exact same weed. He's like, well, I switched over to concentrates 2 years ago. And when did the assaults start? Look at this one. Any use before the age of 18 has a 2.5 time increased risk in the diagnosis of schizophrenia that's dose responsive. Have any of you ever known anyone with schizophrenia? They see and hear things that the rest of us do not. That's a hard way to live. So, acute health effects, especially for law enforcement. Impaired memory, here's what matters from a driving standpoint. Impaired motor coordination, react time, singular focus, reduction in perceptual accuracy. All of those skills are very important when it comes to operating a vehicle. And the reality is that impairment cannot be measured any other way than by a DRE. That drug recognition expert who takes, how long does an average DRE stop take? If you got to call one in, how long are you going to expect them to be there with the person? So say you get one down here in Vinton, they're going to spend 45 minutes with the guy. So an hour. So there's no 0.08. So since there's no 0.08, you got to get a DRE to check behavioral. And since it's fat soluble, and we know this now for sure, it used to be 10 days, maybe a month it would stay in somebody's system. It can stay in somebody's system up to 72 days. Post-use. They'd have to be a chronic user. There'd have to be a lot of things going involved, pretty slow metabolism, etc. But up to 72 days. And since the method of ingestion is so diverse, you can put it on your skin. You can insert it in a suppository. You can't just measure if it's in somebody's mouth anymore. So the presence of THC does not indicate intoxication. In Colorado, 5 nanograms per milliliter is what we consider to be intoxicated, but it goes to a jury. Nobody arrests on it. Definitely nobody tries over it anymore. But under 5 nanograms per milliliter does not prove sobriety. I was telling the story right before we started that the second year after we had this here, we were like, well, here's 5 nanograms will do it. There are plenty of occasions of people testing over 5 nanograms per milliliter and being stone cold sober. And 2 miles from my house, an 18-year-old kid struck and killed a 6-year-old girl who went to my kids' schools. She was on a bicycle ride with her father. It's 2 miles from my home, Longmont, Colorado. The dad's yelling. His window's open. His arm was out the window. He didn't hear it. He hits his daughter, drags her for 1.5 miles with the dad calling and yelling behind it. The 6-year-old's dead. And at the scene, he tested at 2 nanograms per milliliter, less than half the legal limit, but then failed every single roadside sobriety test he was given by the DRE. Charged with operating under the influence vehicular homicide, even though he was 2 nanograms per milliliter. You won't see a test. Listen, think of the financial incentives for this. If I developed a test that did this, I could sell it to every single law enforcement organization in the developed world, and their check's clear. I mean, this is not a $1 million idea. This is a multi-billion-dollar idea. So the market forces behind trying to get one of these tests in place. And here's what you're going to hear for the next 15 years. Next month, almost, there's a company in Canada. It looks good, but we can't measure intoxication any other way than with behavioral. And so what I come back to in my book is that using THC is a privilege. Being able to be safe on our roadways is a right. So my right supersedes your privilege. So until we have a good test, You can't, if there's THC in your system, you just can't drive, period. Here's some good places to look. Project SAM, which again, Senator Grassley's been such a huge support and friend of, NIDA, SAMHSA, lots of others. Use a critical eye. I subscribe to every single pro-cannabis thing on the planet just because I want to see what's going on. And I don't want to lose it. There's my book if you really are super bored. It's not a very good book. As a great lover of literature, I can tell you it's not a good book, but I think it's kind of important, and I got a couple funny things in it. And here are all of the citations. And maybe we have time for 2 questions. Or should we just get another barbecue and go home?
You mentioned being able just to, I could spend a day with lawmakers on this. Could you just speak a little bit about some of those efforts? And how difficult that is, or has you had opportunities to address state senators, representatives, etc.?
Yeah, the challenge that they've got, even the ones who really want to do the right thing, is this is a multi-billion-dollar industry on the other side. And you can make it really hard. And because most people don't recognize the difference a little slight of language makes, you can change bills and do things that are amazing. Like, really, your member has probably been the most vocal in the entire U.S. Senate about this. Lawmakers will pay attention, but they have to be educated to a point where they understand what the language means. Because what we're always being told is it's just weed, it's just weed, it's just weed. And unfortunately, the providers of public health aren't the voice that they used to be in this country.
So what's needed? Mothers Against Drug Driving?
We've got
mothers groups.
Yeah.
How do you combat this?
a MAD.
And if we're talking money, are we talking Monty? Are we talking?
Oh, God, yeah. You got to look at the HIDA report from High Intensity Drug Trafficking Areas report from Colorado. Like, we have 5 different countries super well established doing all their trafficking out of. And the problem is, since it now enters the banking system, because we can use our credit cards, they don't make their money selling weed. They make their money in human trafficking, and they make their money in like counterfeiting. And but yeah, organized crime for sure. What's needed is for the federal government to do what they said they would do at the very beginning. So the Obama administration said, here are 8 pillars. Colorado and California and Oregon, if you violate these 8 pillars, we are coming to town. And a year later, Sam started sending annual letters that just got to be like 70 pages long of a catalog of all the violations of all 8, and nobody's ever responded to it. Sessions was getting ready to do something, but he got canned. What's needed is for people to understand that we're talking about this instead of that. Awareness. Thank you very, very much.